Hi everyone, welcome back to Story Time. I am so glad you're here. We are going to read Gilbert Ford's The Marvelous Thing That Came from a Spring, the accidental invention of a toy that swept the nation. And I am guessing that you probably have played with this simple toy. And I can probably guarantee you that your mother and your grandparents did the same as well. So let's listen to the marvelous thing that came from a spring. And as we like to say, gather your children, gather your bears and blankets too, and let's all settle down because I have a story to read to you. And I hope you enjoy this. The marvelous thing that came from a spring, the accidental invention of a toy that swept the nation. Richard James was a dreamer, but in 1943, the United States was at war. Richard had to support his country and his family, so he worked as an engineer for the United States Navy in a shipyard in Philadelphia. His assignment was to invent a device that would keep fragile ship equipment from vibrating in choppy seas. Richard tried all kinds of springs, but nothing was working. Then one day, a torsion spring fell down from the shelf above his desk. Its coils took a walk, and so did Richard's imagination. This spring may not work for the Navy ships, but Richard knew he had stumbled into something. What was it? This is a spring, and this is another spring. Have you ever played with a spring? After work, Richard rushed home and showed his wife Betty the floppy spring. They gave the spring to their son Tom, who let it go from the top of the stairs. The family watched in astonishment as it walked all the way down. I think it's a toy, Richard marveled. Betty thought so too. She also thought that if they wanted to share their discovery with the world, they need to figure out what on earth to call the thing. I think it is wait, I got it. What about no, let me think. Betty thumbed through a dictionary for 2 days, underlining words. Nothing sounded quite right until she found slinky, meaning graceful and curvy in movement. Slinky also sounded like the swoosh and the clink of the spring's coils in motion. It was only a name, but it was just right. With one word, Betty thought she could transfer the spring unto slinky, a one-of-a-kind thing. Richard and Betty wanted to produce a lot of slinkies. Sorry about that. They did not have the money to do it. So Richard sprang for the bank and took out a $500 loan to have 400 slinkies made. Once they arrived, Richard brought his invention to every toy store in Philadelphia, but no one wanted it. What was the James's idea a flop? Finally, he tried a large department store called Gimbel's. Gimbel showed as little interest in the toy as the other stores, but Richard begged the manager to allow him to demonstrate how it worked to the holiday shoppers just once. And so, on a stormy night in November 1949, with Christmas just weeks away, shoppers poured into Gimbel's. They were searching for the next great stocking stuffer, and Richard was ready. He placed the coil at the top of the ramp he had built and scanned the store for Betty. Where was she? Betty was still pacing back and forth at home. She was afraid no one would want the toy. Just in case, she asked her friend to pose as an excited shopper and gave her $1 to buy one. But Richard was unable to wait any longer, so he took a deep breath and let the slinky go. There it goes. When Betty finally arrived at Gimbel's, there was no need to pretend to love the toy. All 400 slinkies had sold in 90 minutes. The slinky was a hit. Slinky sold out. The war ended that same year, and the troops returned home to marry their sweethearts. A baby boom soon followed, and demand for the slinky skyrocketed. So Richard dreamed up an even bigger idea. He used his engineering skills to build a machine that could coil 80 feet of steel wire into a slinky in 10 seconds. While Richard made the slinkies and drove the delivery van, Betty kept the business running smoothly. She frantically filled orders, sent and collected payments, and hid their profits in a roasting pan below the basement. I wonder why. Soon there was more business than the Jameses could handle by themselves. So Richard and Betty built a factory and hired 20 people to work for them. At last, they were able to spin out enough slinkies for every child in America to have one. Today, the Slinky still inspires kids of all ages and across the globe to play. The end. It took the teamwork of a dreamer and a planner to turn an ordinary spring into a truly marvelous thing. And that, boys and girls and ladies and gentlemen, is the story of how a spring became a toy. I really hope you've enjoyed the book, The Marvelous Thing That Came from a Spring. Do you have a Slinky? Or did you have a Slinky? If you've never played with a Slinky, I suggest you go out and buy yourself a Slinky and have a wonderful time. I am so glad that you came and spent this time with me. I really hope you've enjoyed this book. And I really, really hope that you will come back the next time you see that I have posted a story. Good night, everyone. Now go to bed.